Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Carro Armato, if I'm saying that correctly, M1340 by Rubicon Models. This is a plastic wargaming kit in 28mm or 1/56 scale, and in addition to the M1340, it can be used to build the Semovente Commando M40, which is a kind of turretless version armed with a different hull-mounted gun. On the back of the box there's a few paragraphs about the Carro Armato and its use in World War II. There's also an image of the included decals and some very basic painting guides. Pretty much what you would expect to see on the back of a Rubicon box. Inside we find some sprues moulded in a grey plastic, which is also pretty much what I would expect. This model comes on 2 sprues, and these are quite nice and neatly moulded. The ever-present mould lines are of course present, as ever, like with any kit, but they're pretty minor and you're not going to have to do a whole lot of cleanup when putting this model together. Again, pretty much what I would expect to see from a Rubicon kit. The detail here is pretty good, though do keep in mind that this is a wargaming kit and there are going to be some simplifications of detail. After all, nobody wants to be breaking fine details off their models while they enjoy a spot of wargaming. If you wanted, you could use this as a display piece, and it would look pretty nice, but that isn't really its primary purpose. For what it is, it's nicely detailed, and there's a lot of good rivets and stuff that should catch paint and weathering and end up looking pretty cool. The parts in this kit are well designed and go together nice and easily. If you remember when I built the Carro Armato from Warlord and Italeri, the turret was kind of a pain. Not so in this kit, and we'll look at them side by side at the end of the video. Decals are included as the box said. They wouldn't lie to us, and they look rather good. I don't know what these markings mean, but you can see that there's some helpful labelling on the sheet. I like that. I also like that you get markings for a captured version of the vehicle, particularly one captured by Australia. There's enough bouncing kangaroo markings that you could probably do a couple of vehicles as captured by Aussies. Italeri's kit doesn't include this option, so maybe I'll paint that kit as well with these decals. I don't have an Italian force, but I do have at least a partial Australian one, so this might be useful for me. The instructions are, unsurprisingly, quite good. You'll notice the picture here is slightly different to the one on the box. It's got the kangaroo marking. Nice. The instructions are well laid out, clear, and easy to understand and follow. There are coloured labels to tell you things like when to use glue or not, and which parts get installed first or last, and unless you're not paying enough attention, these are quite helpful, particularly because the colours make them stand out a bit more. Okay, let's start gluing some bits of plastic together. We begin with the lower hull. The hull sides need to be glued onto the central hull part, I guess you would call it. This is made nice and easy by these big V-shaped keyings. A little pressure in an upward direction so the parts sit together nice and firmly, and the sides of the hull are on and looking good. Next, we glue the front plate into place. This is a nice curved piece and it fits nicely in place, obviously on the front of the hull. Make sure that you install it the right way up, with the row of rivets along the top. It makes sense to then put the rear plate on. This is also nice and easy. I make sure to use enough glue so that the glue god will smile upon me and my bonds, and it's on. On the front plate there are some small doodads to add, including this towing ring thing. This is solid in the middle and I don't think it should be, so I decided to drill it out and make it look a bit more convincing. This was kind of fiddly owing to the shape and small size of it, but I did eventually get a hole drilled through it. This probably would have been a bit easier to do if the part was still on the sprue, but I got there in the end, and that's what matters. I glue the part into the recess on the front of the hull, and I think it's turned out looking pretty good. Sometimes it's just worth putting a little bit of extra effort into the small things. I follow this with the 2 hooks on either side of the front plate. These were easy enough to install, though obviously do make sure that the hooks face upwards, otherwise gravity will make them a little bit less effective. Once that's done, it's time for tracks. These are mostly a single part, but the inner parts do need to be added, like this idler wheel. You'll be able to tell quite easily if you've got this on wrong. Same with the drive sprocket. The teeth are missing where they should be meshed with the tracks. Then we add the inner halves of the road wheel sets. Pay attention to these. The leading and trailing wheel have a slight angle in them that matches to the angle of the track. It's not tricky to do, but if you're not paying attention, you might mess it up. I guess that goes for anything really. It is a good idea to pay attention. Now we turn our attention to the upper hull. First, I glue this thing on. I think that little nub on top of it is a radiator fill cap. A set of digging tools comes next, and this goes into place with next to no effort at all. Nice and easy. On the side of the engine deck, I glue this muffler. There's keying to help you get this into the right place, and it's kind of hard to mess it up. I add a bit of extra glue so that it all stays where I want it. Hashtag blessed by the glue god. There's another one of these on the other side of the hull as well, as you can see. In front of the mufflers we add some stowage boxes. These have some good keying to ensure they go on properly, and like the mufflers, there's one for either side. Those are some nice details, and they've gone into place nice and quickly. Now it's time to join the upper and lower hull together. I make sure to apply adequate glue, and the top part more or less just drops right into place, though I did have to apply a bit of pressure to get the parts to fit nice and tight, especially at the rear. Nothing too difficult though. Once that's together, I add the tracks. I apply glue to all the contact points, so the bond is good and strong. We don't want our tracks falling off while we're trying to do tank stuff. These go into place really easily, and I think they look pretty good. The tread detail is a little bit lacking, but this is a wargaming model, and the tracks themselves are a single piece. If you wanted to hide the lack of tread detail, you could do so with some mud. Shouldn't be too hard. The hull is not yet completed, but the instructions tell us that it's time to work on the turret anyway. This is actually the point where you need to decide if you want to build the regular turreted version of the tank, or the turretless commando version. I'm building the regular turreted version, so I'm going to build the turret. Thank you, Captain Obvious. You're welcome. I start by gluing together the two halves of the turret core part, I guess you might call this. The gun mantlet part should be sandwiched in between these at this point, otherwise you won't be able to get this into place without great difficulty, and nobody wants that. The instructions want this left unglued, but clearly I've added glue to it. I want this part to stay still, and glue will ensure that. I just make sure that the elevation is where I want it so that the gun doesn't look weird later on. I test fit the turret front, and it didn't seem to fit closely enough to the turret core, so I trimmed that down a bit to get a better fit. Once I'm satisfied, I glue the roof into place, which is very simple. Next, the side and rear turret parts can be installed. This is nice and easy, and the parts are guided by little pieces of armor at the front, and the keying on the rear. I did need to apply a bit of pressure to get the parts to sit neatly, but nothing too challenging. In my opinion, this is designed a lot better than the turret on the Italeri version, and that was the main issue I had with that model. This one looks pretty good, though again, when test fitting the turret front part, I found it still didn't quite fit, so I trimmed the side parts a little bit, and it fits again. This time, I glue it into place. There is still a bit of a gap there, but it's not as bad as it would have been had I done no trimming, and there should be a little bit of a gap there anyway. Next, it's time for a hatch. This comes as two parts, so if you want, you can model it open and have the commander figure sticking out of it, which is not what I chose to do. Button down for me, please. Next, I add this little mount for the machine gun. This is easy enough to get into place, but do make sure that you've got it around the right way. The opening where the gun mounts should face rearward. And then, why not put that gun on? I give it a bit of a nudge until it looks how I think it should look, though I'm not really sure it should be in this position with the hatch closed. It seems like it would kind of interfere with the hatch opening. But it looks cool anyway, so that's where it is. The main gun comes next, and while this is a small gun, I decided it would be a good idea to drill the barrel out, and it was. It makes the model look just a little bit more convincing. The gun goes into the hole in the front of the turret like so, and because I was careful with its mount earlier on, it's at a fairly sensible elevation and looks good. And with that, the turret is completed, but there's something about the hull that just seems a bit off. We need to assemble the fighting compartment, that's what it is. This looks pretty simple, and it is. This is the main part and we glue the roof on top of it. Do make sure that you choose the correct roof part. There's one for the turreted version that I'm using, and one for the turretless version that I'm obviously not using. This went into place pretty well, though some pressure was needed to get it to sit flat. Next, I install the door on the left side. If you wanted, you could model this open, and it does have some detail on the inside, which I think is a nice touch. There's no interior detail for this model, so unless you put something in there, you would just have a big void if the door was open, but it's still nice to have the option. The part is very easy to install, and if you ask me, it looks quite door. Next is this thing, which I guess might be some kind of an air vent or something like that. Whatever it is, it goes onto the rear wall here. Then it's time to add the front of the fighting compartment. This is made up of multiple parts. I glue the wider part on first and it goes on pretty easily, no real problems here. The gun housing also goes on quite easily. I found I had to apply some pressure to this, but too much pressure will push it out of place, so do be careful with that. The lower part goes next, and this also needed some pressure to take care of gaps. It also had the same issue where it would easily come out of place with a bit too much pressure. Sometimes you've just got to press gently. The hull machine guns can then be installed in the front of the gun housing like so. This is easy, though be sure that you're putting the part the right way up. I think you'll agree this looks pretty shooty. The fighting compartment can then be joined onto the rest of the hull, which is also pretty easy. I had to apply a bit of pressure to get the forward edge into place, but nothing too tricky. I apply some extra glue around the edges to please the glue god and to make sure everything stays where it should. The fit here is pretty good, especially in comparison to the Italeri version. We're nearly done, but a few more details are needed, like these headlamps. These have a nice little triangular hole into which they mount, and the fit is kind of tight, so I had to apply pressure. To avoid breakage and getting glue on my fingers, I used the back of my knife to do this. These parts don't go all the way into their mounting hole, and the result is it looks like these are mounted on plates. I think this is a pretty good design. Next, I add the little stirrupy, laddery things that the crew will use to step up onto the vehicle. There's one of these for either side of the hull, and they go into place quite easily. A little bit of glue to let them know we want them to stay there forever, and the hull is now complete. To finish the model, I add the turret, which locks into place with a simple locking mechanism. The fit was a little bit tight, but that is better than it being too loose. Now we have one good-looking Carro Armato M1340 in 28mm scale from Rubicon Models completed. Let's have a look at it next to the M1441 from Italeri and Warlord, which is obviously the different tank in the tan-coloured plastic. The kit I built was in the Italeri box, but it should be exactly the same as the one in the Warlord box. Obviously these are different tanks, but they're so similar that I think it's reasonable to compare these two kits, and the Italeri version can be used to build the M13 as well. You can see that these kits are quite different from each other. The Italeri model is slightly larger than the Rubicon one, and while it is only a tiny bit bigger, it's enough to be visible, though they do have pretty much all of the same things in about the same places. I mean, they're models of the same thing, so they're not going to be wildly different. The most notable difference I can see is that the Rubicon model doesn't have spare wheels on the rear, and I kind of wish it did. The Italeri kit has slightly finer details, by which I mean the rivets and things like that are a bit less chunky, and it also has better tread detail. The tracks on that kit weren't a single part like on the Rubicon one. There are also non-visible differences. The Rubicon kit has fewer parts, and I found it went together a bit quicker and easier, and the turret on the Italeri model was a bit annoying to put together. These kits are, like I said, clearly quite different to each other, though personally, I wouldn't have a problem fielding them together on the gaming table. They're still close enough in appearance to be the same vehicle, unless you're a real pedant. I don't really feel like one kit is objectively better than the other. They've both got their pros and cons, but nothing really stands out to me as something to make me definitely pick one over the other, and fortunately, I don't have to. I have both. If you're looking for one of these tanks, I'm sure you can use your own eyes to decide which one you prefer anyway. You don't need somebody else to tell you, and they're both enjoyable kits to put together with good results. Speaking of results, I'm quite happy with how this model has turned out. It certainly looks like an M1340, and that really is the entire point. It's a decent looking model as I would expect from Rubicon, and I think it's going to look great once it's painted. The more prominent rivets and stuff like that are pretty typical of a wargaming model, and they should look good and stand out nicely once highlights and weathering are applied. I don't plan on painting this in the immediate future, so if that's something you want to see, don't hold your breath, but do let me know in the comments below. When I do get around to it, my plan is to paint this as captured by the Australians. I don't think these were used for very long by the Australian forces, but I think it would be cool and interesting to do, and that's as good a reason as any. The model was pretty quick and easy to put together. Obviously as a gaming kit it is designed that way. A lot of gamers would be more eager to get their new tank out and fighting than to spend hours gluing tiny bits of plastic together, and that does make for a nice relaxing build that can be done in an afternoon. I enjoyed my time building this. Just about everything fit together nicely, with only a minimum of cleanup required. The exception being, of course, the front of the turret, where I had to do some minor trimming. I wouldn't consider that a big issue though, and it did end up fitting well and looking good. I've come to expect nicely made kits with excellent fitting parts from Rubicon models, and this one is no exception. It gets a hearty thumbs up from me, which you can't see unless you're a patron, and assuming this makes it into the outtakes video. Anyway, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the comment section below. If you've built one of these or any other cool models and you'd like to share, why not stop by our Discord community and share some pictures? We'd really like to see what you've done. If you want to watch me build kits like this live on stream, head on over to my Twitch channel. The link is in the description below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe, follow, ring the bell, become a patron if you would like to see my videos a bit early, or maybe just come say hi on Discord or Twitch. Links to all of my things are in the description below, and as always, I shall return soon. So, until then, be excellent to each other, have a wonderful day, and thank you for watching. Farewell.